Hi, good morning. Thank you to Paul for his introduction, and thank you to Sustainable Business Magazine for the opportunity to say a few words to you over the next 10 minutes or so about the energy efficiency challenge for domestic and particularly non-domestic building stock. Looking at this from the standpoint of a property consultancy at Knight Frank, I'll also attempt to look into the future at what increasing levels of energy efficiency in buildings may do to the value of those buildings and indeed the value of existing energy inefficient stock. Although slightly outside of the scope of today's discussion, I'll also touch on the related challenge of catalysing a new generation of low carbon decentralised energy generation assets and networks, in particular making reference to a project that we're currently working on with the newly formed Thames Gateway Institute for Sustainability, which is attempting in the Lower Lee Valley, the area around the Olympic Park, to lead both a major energy efficiency retrofit project of 30 to 40,000 homes, and also use the new development opportunities in that area to push for a much greater uptake of low carbon networks and decentralised low carbon energy generating projects such as waste to energy projects and biomass gasification projects. Looking first at the energy efficiency retrofit challenge, in many ways the scale of adapting our existing building stock to a low carbon future is a much greater challenge than ensuring that new development meets the zero carbon targets legislated for 2016 for residential and 2019 for commercial property. Half of our residential building stock is over half a century old, and over 80% of the building stock we will have in 2025 has already been built. So if we're to meet the challenge of the UK's carbon reduction targets that Paul referred to, supported by all the main parties in this election, we need to work out how we are going to deliver large-scale energy efficiency retrofit projects. What we're finding in the Lower Lee Valley is that one of the major barriers to taking forward major retrofit projects is the aggregation of demand. The Greater London Authority's innovative Building Energy Efficiency Programme, BEEP, has led the way with creating a demand side of the equation by using the GLA's own built assets for initial projects and subsequently looking to bring in other public sector early adopters who will essentially put their portfolios into the demand pot for the energy efficiency retrofit. By driving the demand side, they've been able to create a supply side reflected in the framework of delivery partners they now have in place. Suppliers on the framework include utility companies, contractors, consultants and technology companies. Whilst this is a very sensible first step in aggregating demand and preparing a framework of delivery partners to take forward the projects, the ability to drive forward large-scale energy efficiency projects becomes much more complicated when the ownership of the buildings is not so homogeneous. How, for example, should we incentivise private households to sign up to deep energy efficiency retrofit projects that can be costly and intrusive? Also, when buildings, both residential and commercial, are in very diverse ownerships, how can we bring together the demand side quantum, as pioneered by the GLA, to drive supply side interest in investing in energy efficiency projects that yield a return based on IPMVP or other modelling and verification? From our experience, there is considerable private sector interest in being involved in large-scale energy efficiency projects, but the market quantum needs to be identified and secure for them to invest. How we aggregate the demand side is one of the major challenges facing projects such as the one we're trying to take forward in the Lower Lee Valley. We also need financing models such as pay-as-you-save to evolve so that we're not just picking the low-hanging fruit in terms of energy efficiency measures, but are taking the more extensive measures needed to drive down the carbon emissions associated with our existing building stock, particularly as in some cases realising the quick wins may in fact reduce our ability to take more extensive measures in the future. I'll turn briefly now to energy generation and how this relates to our energy efficiency challenge. For me, aligning energy efficiency of existing and new buildings with decentralised low carbon electricity and heat generation and distribution is very difficult. I think this is because they're mutually inconsistent. The investment case for low carbon embedded electricity and heat production and distribution, whether that's waste to energy or biomass or other gasification, is based upon a secure concession on the heat supply to a defined market for 30 or 40-year period normally. By making our existing new buildings more energy efficient, we are reducing their demand for heat and therefore reducing the relative return to organisations looking to invest in low-carbon decentralised energy projects. The result is that a larger demand side in terms of numbers of customers needs to be included in the concession to allow for the investment case to stack up. This, it would seem, returns to the point related to the aggregation of demand, which also relates to energy efficiency projects. It seems to me fundamental that we work out better ways of bringing together the demand side for both retrofit energy efficiency and decentralised energy projects if we are to expect the private sector to fund such projects. This formulation of a market quantum needs to be coupled with security of contract. An additional issue that we often face is having to align the need to get projects moving forward quickly with the requirements of public procurement and the seemingly inevitable and large legal costs associated with establishing any new contractual arrangements for large-scale pay-as-you-save schemes. The third and final area I'd like to cover is what the potential repercussions may be for property values of the transformative shift we require from a largely energy inefficient building stock to very high levels of energy efficiency over a relatively short period. I think it's important at this point to make mention of the CRC energy efficiency scheme, which I'm sure has been hotly debated elsewhere at Sustainability Live. As of 3 weeks ago, we now have for the first time a monetisation of the environmental performance of property. Prior to this, our own evidence at Knight Frank, that of other property advisory firms and the IPD, has not shown that buildings that achieve higher levels of energy efficiency achieve higher rents or capital values. Now we have a position where the carbon costs of occupying one building may well be very different to those of occupying another. I have no doubt that as an industry norm of practice begins to emerge in terms of how landlords and tenants deal with the costs and responsibilities of complying with CRC, that it will play a role in discussions between landlords and tenants when they are looking to take space in a particular building. We have already seen CRC clauses being added to new leases and RFPs referring to the position of a landlord in regard of CRC. I think it's only a matter of time before a tenant seeks a lower rent for space in a building because they have quantified the higher carbon costs they may have to bear via the service charge in that building over the term of their lease. It's easy to imagine an occupier seeking, for example, 5% less rent in negotiations over taking space in a building because they are aware of the relative energy inefficiency of that particular building compared to another, and that they are therefore going to be exposed to a greater carbon liability over the course of the lease in occupying that space. The knock-on effect of this may well be significant. Values of property will change as rental levels change, and as I've described, energy inefficient buildings may well find themselves unable to achieve the same rents as more efficient peers because of their higher carbon liability. This will, in short, mean that those energy inefficient buildings have a lower rentalised value and are simply worth less. Through the introduction of carbon pricing to the property sector via the launch of the CRC scheme, we have in effect pegged the cost of occupying property to the price of carbon. The impact of this is not yet known, but I think it will be quite profound. Thank you very much, and be happy to answer any questions afterwards.